Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. And the Dogs are back in the SEC championship game. Deep down, we have to admit, we sort of knew this is probably where all of this was heading, and it is going to be that way on Saturday. So we are ready for it all, ready to talk about it with you. We'll look back on what the win for Georgia Tech means on all of this. We'll get to that here today, too. So the Lane Kiffin drama, there's just a lot, and we're going to do our best to cover it all. Jon Stinchcomb going to help us do that as well. So buckle up, hold on tight. We're going to try to get into it all, the good and the bad from Friday, leading into what is the start of a postseason run for Georgia that we hope doesn't end until somewhere in January. It is all on the way. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, follow me on this for just a moment. Georgia beat Georgia Tech in Atlanta on Friday. It'll now play Alabama again in Atlanta this upcoming Saturday. In between that one and the one that's to come, you've got National Signing Day on Wednesday. You've got the conclusion of the Jared Curtis saga probably on Friday. You've got high school football state semifinals. Also at least this Friday, if not drifting beyond that with the Gainesville saga. We have got, in other words, so much. That's before you even get into whatever went down with Lane Kiffin and everything else. So with all of that in mind, the question you might ask yourself on a day like this is, where do you even start? Well, here's where we're going to start today. Georgia did beat Georgia Tech on Friday, and in the midst of that, we saw a version of Gunner Stockton in that game that we have not seen in several weeks, if not several months. Gunner has been playing amazing for a good stretch of games here now as he concludes his first full season as the starting quarterback for Georgia. But Friday against Georgia Tech was not really an example of the best of Gunner. The overall numbers, 11 of 21, 70 yards passing. That's obviously very low total. Did throw a touchdown to Zachariah Branch. Also threw not the prettiest interception. So that was the overall story. And if you're thinking about this upcoming Saturday and how you beat Alabama in a rematch in the SEC championship, well, obviously a better version of Gunner is something that you're going to have. So in anticipation of this Saturday's game, leading into that, let's talk a little bit about Gunner Stockton right now and a big challenge that probably impacted Gunner and faces the Georgia offense here coming up this week. Let me start with this. I thought that Kirby in his post-game commentary on Saturday was incredibly candid, really issuing a challenge to Gunner Stockton of what they want to see him do in the midst of what was going on there on Friday afternoon. I think this is incredibly candid from Kirby. I think it's interesting, and it sets us up for how Gunner gets back on track against Alabama this upcoming weekend. This is Kirby from Friday afternoon.
I want to see the tape and see. Obviously it wasn't great. There was some drop 8 in there. There was some pressure he took on, a couple batted balls. He's got to do what he's coached to do. And that's the toughest thing is Mike and Streeter, got to put him in great situations. There's a couple plays that we think were out there that we didn't make, and he'll watch the tape. He'll grow from it and get better, and so will the rest of the team.
Once again, I think that's very raw and honest from Kirby Smart. When he challenges Gunner right there, he's got to do what he's coached to do. In the midst of a couple of batted balls and obviously an interception, Kirby says there was stuff out there that perhaps Gunner could have done through the air, and he didn't do it. Tuck and ran a little too quick or decided to check down or whatever. There was some stuff that was out there for Gunner in this game, and Gunner didn't quite pull the trigger on it. Very reminiscent of the conversation that we were having about Gunner in September. And based on the way that Gunner played, really starting Tennessee game all the way through, it's almost like the early season stuff there, for the most part, has been forgotten. It's been covered up by everything that's happened for the positive since then. But Friday, just being honest, was not a good game for Gunner Stockton. And Kirby Smart says Gunner's got to do what he's coached to do. When you see the stuff that we've set up for you, you got to deliver the football right there. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that Gunner Stockton himself would be the first one to say, hey, nothing wrong with challenging me. If I don't play my best, then yeah, hold me to a high standard, push me to be better, show me where I messed up. And no one's going to be more committed to coming out and trying to fix that, obviously, than Gunner Stockton is. But we're led to believe in this game on Friday that there were some things that Gunner could have done that he didn't do, and perhaps that explains why. I mean, really, on a day in which your running back, Nate Frazier, has like 100 yards rushing in the first half, that ought to, we would think, set you up to be dominant on that side of the ball. But even though Tech really could not stop the Georgia running game, there wasn't a ton that Georgia could do to build on that foundation. Very strange day for Georgia on that side of the ball. And Kirby gives you his explanation why of, hey, Gunner, when we set him up for what we expect him to see, when Gunner sees it, you got to get rid of it. You got to deliver the football there in that moment. We're led to believe against Tech on Friday that's not necessarily what happened. And on our DawgNation post-game call-in show, the terrific analyst who joins us there, Rodrigo Blankenship, he gave his own explanation for this too, that if Gunner was not, to use Kirby's phrase, doing what he was coached to do on Friday, why was that against Georgia Tech? Well, Rodrigo pointed back to another topic that was a pretty big deal earlier in the season, that perhaps after throwing like as I said before, a not good interception, seems like that Gunner was just off target with his throw intended for loss and lucky on that early interception. Rodrigo said maybe in the aftermath of that, Gunner just had his confidence shaken. This is what Rodrigo said, the terrific former Georgia kicker in our DawgNation post-game call-in show going back to Friday evening. Here's Rodrigo Blankenship.
I'm not too concerned about it, but I do feel like after the interception, I feel like Gunner Stockton lost a little bit of his confidence and a little bit of his swagger, where after that interception, there were some drives where he dropped back to pass. It felt like he wasn't really getting all that much pressure, but decided to pull the ball down and take off. Sometimes he was able to make something happen, and sometimes he wasn't. And I feel like he just got a little bit rattled and a little bit shaken up after that interception. And it took him a while to really regain his composure later in the game, to where we saw a couple more of those deep shots in the second half where he got his confidence back. So I think that all of those factors kind of contributed to this, as you mentioned, or very astutely put it, anemic performance from the offense today.
And, in the clip we heard from Kirby Smart a moment ago prior to from Hot Rod there, Kirby talked about they're dropping 8 in coverage sometimes, and you may not have played the quarterback position. I certainly did not. But you can imagine what that must look like. If they're dropping that many guys back in coverage, your passing lanes seem very crowded, and it can be easy to get confused when you've got that many guys dropping back in coverage on what a few times were obvious passing downs. And maybe, as Rodrigo says, after having already thrown a pick, maybe that made Gunner a little bit hesitant. Whatever the case is, you can't have that repeat itself against Alabama on Saturday, because in the first matchup between Georgia and Alabama, at least early in the game, Alabama also showed Gunner some looks that maybe made him a little hesitant there early too. Fair and balanced though here, Kirby Smart also, as a lead into the SEC championship on Saturday, did speak as a part of the teleconference last night. Rare Sunday media appearance for Kirby, but it's in keeping with the tradition for the SEC championship. And after re-watching the film of Gunner Stockton, said, actually, there may have been some things I liked more about Gunner than maybe I initially thought. Kirby gave an updated analysis on Kirby when he spoke via phone to reporters last night. Here's Kirby Smart.
He did some good things. He made some good decisions. He had some a couple times he had some pressure in his face where we probably missed some guys that were open, that he's got to navigate the pocket a little better, or just get rid of it, and try not to take a sack. Thought he forced the one ball for the interception, but that's not like him. So he probably played better than I actually thought after the game. And his, the ability of the offensive line and the run game really helped set the tone for the first half. And then, second half wasn't as good, and they did some different things to hurt us.
So interesting to hear Kirby Smart almost upgrade his evaluation after seeing the film again, admitting that, yeah, when there were some bodies in his face, maybe he didn't see everything they wanted him to see, but overall, maybe it wasn't that bad of a day. Obviously, the statistics would tell you it's certainly well below Gunner's standard. And by the way, he himself was more happy to acknowledge that than anybody when he spoke on Saturday, talking about his belief that he needed to be better, while also being asked a question about the other big issue that faced the Georgia offense, which is the fact that Drew Bobo, Georgia's very important starting center, leaves this game, doesn't return via injury. Gunner talked about that and his own struggles after the game on Saturday.
Yeah, Drew's a great player. He's one of my best friends. Just seeing him go down, it was tough, but Malachi did a good job of stepping up. We didn't execute as good as we wanted to. I didn't play as good as I wanted to today, but as long as the Dogs win, it's always a good day.
Now, we would agree with that last part of it. Hey, in the midst of the conversation we're having now, Dogs still won for an 8th straight time against Georgia Tech and a 50th time overall for this senior class. So we're feeling pretty good here ahead of the SEC championship on Saturday. But we're also going to have the conversation about, well, how is it that Georgia beats Alabama, and better play from the Georgia offense is clearly one of the things that you need, which is where, in this point in the conversation, we'll spin it forward a bit and talk about Drew Bobo's absence. That's what that question was about for Gunner. And y'all, you already know this. You don't need for me to tell you. This is a very big deal, because if Rodrigo Blankenship is right, and to a degree I believe that he is, then maybe Gunner Stockton seemed less confident in the game on Friday than we're used to seeing him over the course of the last couple of months. If I had to guess, and it's an educated guess, if there was a less certain, a little bit more pensive version of Gunner, the absence of Drew Bobo may have played a role in that. We've talked a lot over the years about the security blanket provided by a really good Georgia center, and it seems like Georgia almost always has a top shelf center, guys like Cedric Von Granger that felt like they started 100 games for Georgia. Obviously not that many, but it felt that way. These veteran guys, these guys that can help you recognize things, these guys that can just handle that big nose man in front of them. The center is just a big deal at Georgia, and on Saturday Georgia played most of that game without Drew Bobo, and I am sure, we can only guess, that made Gunner Stockton a little bit uncomfortable. And frankly, it makes every Georgia fan a bit uncomfortable here too, because we don't quite know how long this is going to linger. Certainly you see plenty of chatter on the internet that maybe Bobo's played for the last time here in 2025. It's at least a possibility. And in his absence, tough job for Malachi Tolliver to step in and try to play, even though he did get some experience the previous game for Georgia against Charlotte. Still, tough task to step in the way that he did, and it seems like Georgia was probably missing Bobo a pretty good bit on Friday, and you better believe that is a major concern heading to the SEC championship on Saturday. So let's talk about this for a moment, starting with what Kirby said about the status of Drew Bobo and how he thought Malachi Tolliver played in the midst of that injury transition. This is Kirby also going back to Friday afternoon.
Don't know. Have to reserve that for the tape and watch. Thank goodness, Malachi got the time he got week before to go in there and play. There was one run that we thought would have got out, been an explosive, that he didn't quite get the guy, but I don't honestly know until I watch that tape.
So pretty candid analysis that they at least missed a couple of opportunities at some big running plays, and just the overall rhythm of the offense seemed to be impacted by Drew Bobo going out. You would assume that'd be the case. We've been led to believe and come to understand that the center position is incredibly important for things you can see, things you can't see, tangible, intangible, everything else. Drew Bobo has provided a huge value to Georgia, and now they don't have him. Now, Malachi Tolliver would not be Georgia's backup center if he didn't have the potential of also being a very good one, too. We understand that. Georgia's also got Cortez Smith, who, listen, there are a lot of people, and this is not to disrespect Malachi Tolliver at all, but there are a lot of people that I know that believe that Cortez Smith is a future star at the center position, a very, very well-liked prospect, but he's been a little bit banged up. I guess he left the Charlotte game and maybe was a little bit limited in practice leading to the game against Georgia Tech. He's also a true freshman, and with Georgia playing a couple of true freshmen a lot already in the offensive line, to think about another true freshman at the center position, that gets pretty tricky for Georgia. There's also other guys potentially you might think. Once again, on Sunday, Kirby Smart, as part of the SEC coaches teleconference, talked about what other options Georgia might have at the center position if it really is true they're going to play the rest of this year, including the SEC championship, without Drew Bobo. This is Kirby one more time.
We've had other guys snap during the year, during training camp. We always do. multiple guys playing it. We've had other guys rep in there. Glover, Micah has been in there and done some things, and so has Glover. But we feel good about the guys we have there that have played it the most. It's not a position that you want to be changing out a lot.
So I would say that barring another injury, that means you probably don't get a Donnie Glover over there. You probably don't get a Micah Morris over there. It sounds like Kirby Smart's pretty steadfast in that, unless he's just sandbagging, and perhaps he is. I mean, listen, anything's possible ahead of a game against Alabama, but we're going to take him at his word on that for a moment. He does mention guys, plural, which means you're probably thinking Tolliver and maybe Cortez Smith, because maybe Cortez is healthy enough to compete for that. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this, and I don't think you need for me to. You probably already know this. Not having your starting center going into a game when you're lining up across Tim Keenum, this Alabama defensive line, and everything they want to throw at you from a schematic standpoint, that's really, really hard. And there is a chance that the Georgia offense just suffers because of Drew Bobo's absence. It may just be that's just as cut and dry and as simple as that. I'm not trying to be negative or a wet blanket, but this is potentially a very serious injury. It's one of those things that probably doesn't impact the point spread a ton because it's a non-quarterback, but people who are quote-unquote ball knowers realize that, boy, the center position can really mess with your offensive cohesion, and on Friday for Georgia, it probably did. However, because we do try to find a silver lining when we can, maybe the silver lining would be this, is that, as Kirby repeatedly said, both Friday and Sunday, at least Tolliver got some experience in the game against Charlotte. That's a good thing, and I would say it's a far different situation when you begin on a Monday knowing that you're likely to play on Saturday, more so than you begin on Monday in your traditional backup role and you get thrust into duty during the game, even though I'm sure Malachi and Cortez and everybody else is preparing as hard as they can. It's just different when you know you're going to be the guy. Frankly, it's different for these Georgia coaches when they're preparing you as if you are the guy. So even though it's a much stiffer brand of competition against Alabama, there's a chance that Malachi Tolliver could be, we would certainly hope, far better this week than maybe he was a previous week. Or, maybe there's a chance that Cortez Smith can compete for this too. So to sum all of this up, if Gunner really was dealing with a shaken confidence on Friday, some of that may have come from the pick that he threw, but we would put a lot of this too on the transition that happened in front of him at the crucial offensive line position, center. And it certainly looks like for a while, maybe even the rest of the season, Georgia's going to be without Drew Bobo. That means whether it's Malachi Tolliver or Cortez Smith, whoever emerges as that guy for this upcoming Saturday, it is going to be a crucial spot. And there are some very fair questions being asked about what kind of replacement they can provide for Bobo. This is a very big issue. Georgia's going to have a spotlight on this all week long. But with a week to prepare, there's opportunity for improvement. If that could be the case, then maybe Gunner can get back on track to the guy we enjoyed watching throughout most of October and November. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Can I just say this real quick, and I'll be very fast? So to me, this is the best my voice has sounded in forever. I'm just, for those of you here with us every day, I've had a really rough year on the voice front. It's just one of those things that's not going away. Been to numerous doctors. Will continue to go to numerous doctors. I'm taking my health serious on this, but I don't think it sounded better than this since early September. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's just a fluke, but boy, feels like it's a little bit better today than it's been here in a while, and I'm certainly thankful for that. An answer to many prayers just to have it functioning a little bit better. So pardon me for the self-indulgent statement, but I did want to point that out. So if you're on video, radio, podcast, whatever, glad you're here. Super thankful to our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia who make it all possible for you as well. And boy, winter is here. It is cold, it is rainy. I mean, weather yesterday was just miserable. And when it's like that, you want to keep all that cold weather on the outside. You don't want it getting drafty on the inside of your house. My daughter said something funny the other day. We've recently moved in the last year. We lived in, and she was talking about what she liked about our house, and she was talking about how it really feels like the temperature is the same in all the parts of the house, which is kind of what you want that to be. That's a good thing. And so we were feeling really good about that. And if you want the same type of deal in your home, if you want all of the various zones of your home to feel like a similar temperature, you don't want draftiness, you don't want anything like that. If that's the situation, our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia can help you with that. They can install those energy-efficient windows. And if you haven't thought for a while about window technology, I'm telling you right now, this is an awesome time for you to do that because you wouldn't believe the stuff that Pella's able to do. In fact, you should explore this for yourself. Check out PellaGA.com/DawgNation. That's PellaGA.com/DawgNation, and you can look at these brand new options they have in the window category. In some cases, they got the shades and the blinds built into the windows. That's a really sleek look. It's also going to keep all that cold wind, that drizzly rain, all that miserable stuff that you get in the winter time of the year. Keep that on the outside of your house where it's supposed to be, and keep that expensive heat that you're probably paying a lot for, the energy bills. Keep that on the inside so you're getting full advantage of the money that you're spending. That's what they can do. Also, if you live near noisy roads and things like that, the trucks and whatnot, I mean, it seems like vehicles just get louder and louder and louder every year. I don't quite understand that. But if you want to keep that road noise or whatever else may be existing around your house, if you want to keep it on the outside, these great windows from Pella can reduce noise on the inside of your house too, which makes it feel a little cozier, a little homier, which is exactly what you want. And you got great saving opportunity right now too. About 50% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. You can't beat that. So give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429 or online, PellaGA.com/DawgNation. We love having Pella Window and Door of Georgia as a part of DawgNation Daily. We also love having Jon Stinchcomb on the show too. Missed John last week. He had some personal business to take care of. He's back this week. We're going to talk to him, you better believe, about the center position. I don't know that Jon Stinchcomb ever snapped at any point in time in his football career, but I think he knows how important this spot is and what's facing Georgia without just what feels like a grizzled veteran in the case of Drew Bobo. Not quite, only in his first full year of starting. My goodness, with college football being the way it is these days, Drew almost feels like an old man. What it's going to be like now playing without him and how much maybe the Georgia offense suffered from his absence on Friday. We'll talk to John more about that in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And boy, it's a big week in Atlanta coming up with our friends in Dr. Pepper. We'll tell you more about that in a moment. But let me give you a positive spin on the Georgia win against Georgia Tech beyond just the basic facts. 8 straight, you love that. That's a program record for Georgia, matching a record in the rivalry that dates all the way back to the 1950s. So that's a big deal. 50th win for these seniors. We're happy about that too. But beyond that, let me tell you my general feeling about Friday's game. That while it will probably not be as fondly remembered as the previous year's 8 overtime thriller, overall, I think it's a better performance for Georgia. The phrase that we sometimes use around the college ball playoff, which I think is a fairly loaded phrase, seems to mean different things to different people. That's the idea of game control. Georgia last year won a thriller against Georgia Tech, in many ways a precursor to the kinds of thrilling games it's been playing a lot this year. But in the midst of that 8 overtime thriller, part of the reason why you got to overtime is because of a lack of game control from Georgia, giving up a ton on defense. A couple of issues offensively, early turnovers, things like that allowed Tech to build a big advantage, and then Georgia has to come storming back. It's a really fun win for Georgia, one of the craziest games in 2024 in the history of this rivalry, and frankly, one of the wildest games that's been played in Sanford Stadium, perhaps up until maybe the Ole Miss game this year. It was a crazy, memorable, thrilling game, but it's not exactly a game in which Georgia had very much control over it. It's just hanging on tight and holding on for a wild ride, and it just so happened to work out in Georgia's favor in the end. It'll be remembered fondly, but not because of how well Georgia played. And yet, this Friday's game will not be remembered as fondly. People just have a bias in favor of offense. The Georgia offense didn't play well. But we cannot lose sight of this. The Georgia Tech offense coming into the game was 5th in America in yards per game. This was a very prolific offense. They were inside the top 20 in America in points scored per game, and yet Georgia on Friday held them to 9 points. And y'all, that is not nothing, to use bad grammar, given the defensive issues we think we've seen from Georgia at various times this year. To step up and stop Tech in a way that it did not last year, and frankly didn't really do it the previous year either, that's a pretty big statement, we would believe, against a ranked opponent on a Black Friday afternoon in which a lot of folks were tuned in to watch. The Georgia defense stepped up and helped Georgia control the game in which the offense, for long stretches, wasn't doing anything. So ahead of this game Saturday against Alabama, we think the Georgia defense deserves a bit of a pat on the back, and it is a reason for Georgia fans to feel a little bit better about what an Alabama rematch might look like. This defense playing better now, we think, than it was back in September when Alabama got, for the most part, whatever it wanted in the first quarter and in large stages of the first half of this game. After the game on Friday, Kirby Smart talked about what he liked about his defense against Georgia Tech.
Tackled well, kept them off balance, held them field goals, got put in some really bad situations in the second half and responded every time. Really proud of the effort and toughness they played with.
Effort, toughness, you got to be proud of that. We loved it. And speaking of effort and toughness, my gosh, the emotional leader, C.J. Allen, we talked about this on Friday, and we were thrilled that Georgia had kind of shown that video clip of Allen getting on the bus. It was a little bit of a hint they might be ready to play. But if you listen to the show on Friday, we still didn't take it all that seriously. We thought it was a fun homage to the possibility, but we still thought his presence was more in a leadership role as opposed to an on-field role. But CJ played a lot. He got a tackle for loss. It was amazing to see him back on the field after the injury that he had sustained, and that's the kind of emotional lift that may have benefited the entire Georgia defense and gives you a lot more reason for optimism on Saturday against Bama too. Kirby talking about C.J. Allen.
Pretty amazing. I mean, the sacrifice he made, first of all, he chose to get the surgery done immediately, as fast as possible. He knew that would give him a chance at coming back for this game, and he really wanted this game. Kid from just south of Atlanta, and I didn't think he would be able to, but he's wired different. I mean, this kid, just wired different. He came over here in high school and worked out every day he could during camps and just wanted to get better. So when I saw him out there on Monday, Tuesday doing a little bit, and then Wednesday doing more, and then Thursday he was ready to go. So it's a credit to him and who he is and how much he loves this program, because not a lot of kids would have done that coming off that surgery.
So 1,000,000%, you already know it. It tells you a lot about who C.J. Allen is as a young man, but let me also tell you this, that for as tough as C.J. is and as committed to being the best version of himself as C.J. is, you don't rush back to get on the field if you don't also believe in the best of your teammates too. There are a lot of guys, especially in CJ's case with a bright NFL future, that in the face of an injury, maybe you slow play it a bit if you don't really kind of know what it is you're coming back for. If you don't feel very confident in your teammates, if you don't feel very confident in your postseason scenarios, then you might wonder, what do I really have to play for? So CJ's return doesn't just demonstrate what makes him a special player. I think it also demonstrates that this special player believes this team that he's playing for can be special too. And y'all, I do think if you're trying to figure out how confident you are going into Bama on Saturday and then a college football playoff that we believe is going to be in line for Georgia after that, let C.J. Allen's confidence guide you on this. That Allen rushed back to play because apparently he really likes playing with these guys and really believes in what these guys can do together. I think you got to take something from that. And I think it speaks to a unit who clearly, we would say, getting better right now. Better year over year against Georgia Tech by a long shot, but also better in recent weeks against Mississippi State's moved in a lot of teams. Georgia handled them pretty well. Texas is obviously still a very good ranked level opponent. Georgia handled them. Tech, you can say what you want to about the Yellow Jackets over the course of history, but in this current era, their offense is pretty good, and Georgia kept them out of the end zone all day long. It seems like this is a defense that is showing improvement from where it was at the beginning of the season, and Kirby Smart also talked about that on Friday too.
I think they've played well the last couple of weeks, getting better. I think there's more confidence. I think there's some players that have gotten comfortable back there playing movement. I think the coaches have kind of figured out who we are, and they're using the skill sets of the players that we need to use. So we got to continue to get better there, but I've been proud of how they practice and how they work.
Let me give you a few names here for a moment. Do you think that Gabe Harris has gotten better over the course of the season? I believe he certainly has. Has Quintavious Johnson gotten better? Did you see the day that Q had against Georgia Tech? I would say that he certainly has. We know Ellis Robinson has. The interception that he got against Tech was, it's been favorably compared to what Malachi Starks did against Oregon, but it's also back-to-back weeks with this very athletic-looking interception. The kind of play with a ball in the air that you haven't always seen from the Georgia cornerbacks. That's what Ellis is able to do. DeMello's emerged here too. Part of the reason maybe that Daniel Harris is no longer with this program. Raylan Wilson, have you liked what you've seen from him this year? Boy, that's a guy who's made quite a name for himself. And I could probably keep going, but that's just a handful of names that Georgia seemingly is getting better at all these individual spots with these individual names, and collectively that's a defense that's improving too. Now, I get it, and I promise you a lot this week we're going to talk about how it can be better this time against Alabama than it was in September and than it was in some of the previous matchups. I get the weighty topic that it is for Georgia fans. But when you saw what this defense did on Friday against a Tech offense that's moved it and scored on everybody, maybe as a Georgia fan, your confidence ought to be growing just a bit. And that's around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, y'all know Dr. Pepper is not just a sponsor for me. I'm a big fan of Dr. Pepper. I have been since childhood. And so for me, one of the great sources of pride I have is the fact that this week in Atlanta, where we do this show from, our city's really taken over by Dr. Pepper. They own the SEC championship, all the hotels. You're talking about you can't be in Mercedes-Benz Stadium on Saturday without being confronted by the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. And we love it. The entire press box will be loaded down with Dr. Pepper on Saturday. I'll drink a metric ton's worth. I can promise you that. And I can't wait for it. I'm just really proud. And I'm thrilled to have Georgia back in the SEC championship first and foremost. And I love Dr. Pepper's presence there as well. So you better believe as I'm getting ready for game day, Dr. Pepper's a big part of what I'm doing. I would encourage you to make it a big part of what you are doing as well. Because when it comes to college football, the SEC championship, DawgNation Daily, it's a Pepper thing. We love Dr. Pepper being a part of that. We also love Jon Stinchcomb being a part of it too. So we've done a lot on Georgia thus far. There are more issues we need to get to. Let's try to cover as much ground as we can. We'll try to keep it moving. We're glad you're with us. And I promise you, before we're done, on a completely different topic, we'll get into Lane Kiffin and the coaching hysteria around the SEC from this weekend, too, plus some of the results of rivalry week and what Georgia fans should think about that. That's all on the way. But now, how about Jon Stinchcomb, the great former All-American, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
John, there are days where there's so much going on that literally I almost don't even know where to begin. This really feels like one of them. So in no particular order, let me start with this. Georgia is in the SEC championship on Saturday. Given the other scenarios that Georgia could be experiencing, are you glad to have the Dogs against the Tide this weekend?
We live in a weird time of college football because it almost feels as if we were better situated if we hadn't gone into the SEC championship game. You very easily could have bypassed the first round and automatically made it into deeper into the college football playoffs had we not gone to the conference championship. So I think the discussion of whether it's still needed, whether it's relevant, whether it's a benefit. Obviously, you leave with a trophy, that's a good thing. But to think that because Texas A&M lost and we go to the SEC championship, it causes us to play at least one more game, possibly two more games than what we would have played if we didn't go into the championship game. I think that causes some consternation. It needs some discussion because you look at it and never should it be a punishment to go to your conference's championship game. And it almost seems as if Georgia has to at least get prepared for a much tougher opponent than what they would have seen had they not played in the conference championship. So it's weird. I'm excited for the opportunity, really, for Georgia to get back out there. They're playing much better ball on defense than the first time around against Alabama. But I think every Georgia fan is going, oh no, another game against Alabama in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium that, hasn't been a good experience for us so far.
Let me tell you what I think would make it unquestionably a good thing for Georgia. I don't know if it'll play out this way, but I believe that it should. It would be a very good thing for Georgia to go into Saturday, beat Alabama, and have Alabama then be eliminated from the college football playoff. And people are going to say, well, you can't be punished for playing in a conference championship game. That's been the logic that the committee certainly seemed to adhere to a year ago. And I understand where people are coming from on that. But the flip side of this, John, is I think if you're Georgia and you win, you need to get something for winning. And if the only thing you get is a chance to eventually play Alabama for a third time, then I'm not quite so sure what the value of winning the SEC championship was. But if Georgia beats Alabama, that'd be 3 losses for them in a season in which you've got a glut of teams in the 10-2 category where there's not enough spots for all of them. Texas at 9-3 wants to argue for their chance to be in too. I think it is reasonable to at least suggest that if Bama loses on Saturday, maybe it's not playoff worthy. And if you could eliminate Alabama and then move into a playoff where you no longer had to worry about the presence of what's been a little bit of an arch nemesis for you, I think that'd be a real prize for Georgia. I don't know that the committee will operate that way, but I do believe it should.
I hear you. I appreciate it. I know I don't want to see Alabama 3 times in a given season, but for the conference, you have to think that that's bad. Long term, you make it to the conference championship and you get punished. You get eliminated from the college football playoffs. I think if the coin was flipped and Georgia is sitting there in Alabama's shoes this time around, they'd be going, that would be egregious. It would be ridiculous. And I understand right now there's very little upside to playing in this game. And it's unfortunate because of the way things are set up. We're talking about an SEC championship. It was one of the primary driving forces and goals that every Georgia team up until the CFPs had set. And now it's almost a punishment. And that is a travesty, but it's where we are. There is very little upside. And you get an So that would be the only benefit of playing in this game, is that it's the only game post regular season that you can lose in the SEC and not get punished. And what you're saying is, maybe you should be. Maybe it should be that the only benefit is that you can knock out one of the good teams. Because for Georgia, they were going, we already had that first round bye. We were the top 4 team, and now we have to play an extra game against a better opponent than what we probably have seen. And the only benefit would be is if we lose, that we're not automatically eliminated from continuing to play. And I would hate to think, based on your argument, that card would be taken off the table.
Sure. Let me mention this just because it is news and we haven't gotten it in yet. Daniel Harris, the Georgia cornerback, has announced that he is entering the transfer portal. Based on what Kirby Smart said last night, it sounds like Kirby, doesn't necessarily expect Harris to be with this team moving forward. Boy, it seems like bad advice to whoever told Daniel to do this. Now, obviously, Georgia has made its decision at the cornerback spot, and we really like what both Ellis Robinson and DeMello Jones bring to the table right now. I don't know how much Harris would be playing on Saturday or in the college football playoff. He really has not played very much for Georgia over the course of the last couple of months. But my gosh, given the fact that the portal doesn't open until January, the decision to leave right now, whoever told Harris this was a good idea, I think has given him some bad advice. But, John, this is just, I guess, one of those things you have to deal with here in 2025.
Yeah, it's crazy to me to think that makes its way to Twitter, and that I'm going to enter the transfer portal in a month uh, with your team heading to the conference championship and top 4 team in the country and college football playoffs ahead of us. I don't know what benefit it was to Daniel. It seems like really odd timing. I'm sure he's frustrated that he probably felt like he was next man up and was expecting a more uh, substantial role this season, and it hasn't panned out that way. And I can understand that frustration. I don't get the timing of this. I don't know how it is beneficial in any way, shape, or form for him. And maybe it's got something to do with signing day and making sure that those teams that are possibly ponying up more money for kids coming out of high school, that they know he's an option. I'm stretching there because I don't get it. I don't understand it. I think they're continuing to try to massage this calendar into a way that makes sense. It doesn't really make sense that the early signing day happens this week before the conference championship, and all those other pieces that fall into place. But to announce this a month before you even have an opportunity to transfer seems really wild to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to belabor the point, but I'll just say one more thing about this, which is, listen, the Georgia coaches are not dumb. If they make a playing time decision, they know they're going to get penalized for whoever they decide to downgrade. When Georgia stopped playing Harris, they knew they were going to lose him. I mean, we just live in a day and age in which if you're not playing, you're likely leaving, and Georgia moved Harris down for 2 younger guys who, I mean, everything I've seen from Ellis and DeMello leads me to believe they should be on the field. Younger guys jumping out of Harris. Georgia had to have known when they demoted Harris and essentially stopped playing him, well, of course they were likely to lose him. But I hope that Daniel Harris would know, and I think I have pretty good grounds to say this on, is that Harris is not going to make himself $1 more. He's not going to have an edge on anybody else by going into the portal right now. That if he would have stuck with Georgia through December or whenever, even if you leave before the college football playoff, if you had just stuck with Georgia through this particular game, the Georgia coaches, they may even help you go find your next spot if you'd like that. But the idea that you put yourself in a better position for your next spot by leaving your team now, I mean, if anything, you almost wonder if the opposite's true. But you certainly aren't getting in. I mean, at least I don't think, John, you're not getting in line in front of anybody by doing this now. I don't believe.
Yeah, again, I don't understand it. It draws comparisons to me, and this is almost to the benefit of Georgia. If you look at it and you say, Daniel Harris, we wanted him to return when he tried and flirted with the transfer portal. Was it a year or 2 ago? And we made sure that he was a part of this system, and I'm sure NIL was a part of it. And for him to be jumped for younger players, I think is a sign that the Georgia coaching staff is saying, outside of the money that's getting paid to these players, we want the best players to be on the field at any given moment. And it can't be tied to how much we have invested in them. And that's a frustrating point for some of the third-party companies maybe that have invested in these players and saying, hey, you asked me to pony up for this kid to be a part of our roster, and he's not receiving the playing time that kind of justifies that. That's maybe a conversation to be had. But it makes me think of the edge rusher from Florida, Pyburn.
Yeah.
Transfers to LSU. I don't know how substantiated this is, but at the time, the rumors were included in this package is guaranteed playing time on 3rd down and all these other pieces that gets that dirty little fingers into the game itself. And I think that is a dangerous, slippery slope. Anytime you start guaranteeing playing time based on anything other than performance, it is to the detriment of your team. And so Daniel Harris is a talented guy. We've seen him early on in his career, and you thought, man, he's flashed, and there's potential there. And I'm sure he sees that, he feels that, he wants the opportunity to build on it, and is frustrated with where things stand. But what a disservice to the rest of the team and the whole organization if, because of NIL, because of anything outside of what you've shown on the practice field and what you show on any given Saturday, if that is part of the decision-making process, it is a disservice to your team and undermines everything that you're doing. And Georgia is notorious for running hard practices.
Yeah.
For what point? If it's based on something outside of how you perform, if it's based on NIL deals and promises, then you're not helping yourself. You're not helping your team, and you're really setting up certain scenarios for a downgraded, degraded system that players can't appreciate.
All right, I want to talk about Drew Bobo with you for a moment. And listen, I think most of our audience pretty plugged in. If you said, hey, who is the player that Georgia can least afford to lose for injury to injury? I think most of our audience would have Drew Bobo like no lower than probably second or third on that list. I think most of us have come to understand that the center position is incredibly important, and Georgia's backup depth is pretty young in the case of Malachi Tolliver and Cortez Smith. John, you're an offensive lineman. How important is that center position, and what is the outlook now for Georgia if Drew Bobo is played for the last time in 2025?
Yeah, that is a huge blow. If that's the case, Drew Bobo, obviously a great individual performer. I think we saw his impact all season long. But what stood out to me in the second half was we've got two true freshmen that are a part of this equation, offensive line equation. Donnie Glover, Juan Gaston, big time contributors. And for both of them, you saw a drop off in performance, and you think, man, what's that about? And from one half to the next, not just from the center position, but from other positions. And I think part of that impact is when you've got a voice in the center of that offensive line that is getting everyone on the same page, it unloads some of the mental burden that exists. If everyone's clear on protection and clear on where we're going on a given run scheme, then it makes it easier. You can play faster. You can play with more confidence. And for young players, when they don't have that aspect of the game on their plate, and it's on Drew Bobo's plate, it allows them to play better. And I think that's one of the bigger pieces. I think this week of practice is vital to get everyone on the same page and understand what the communication is, because you start to get a feel for things and a flow. And it's a benefit when you have guys like Micah Morris and Drew Bobo next to each other that have been a part of this system for as long as they have, that they can help those around them. Monroe Freeling probably doesn't need the ins and outs and minutia of each play and who we're going to and what's my role. He probably understands that. For some of the younger players, 90% of the time they get it. For that 10%, for that 5%, whatever that percentage is, that Drew Bobo has gone above and beyond and said, this is who you got. Let's make sure that they make the declaration, set the protection, but also, and that's the piece that I think gets undervalued at time, is the I do this, and that's probably not on my plate, but I'm going to take it on my plate because it'll make us perform better. I think that's part of what we saw, a little bit of drop off in the run game and protection in the second half against Georgia Tech. And it's something that I'm grateful you have a week to prepare for as you head into this game against Alabama. But it is a big loss for really this entire offense, but certainly this group up front, to have that stabilizing voice and performer in the middle of that offensive line.
So let me ask you a two-part question here on this, and the first part's probably pretty dumb, but what is the bigger challenge? You got to snap the ball, you've got to recognize, certain aspects of the defense pre-snap, and then when the ball is put into play, you got Tim Keenum, breathing right down your neck the moment you snap that football. What of the task, if we assume it's Tolliver, which of those three the biggest challenge for him? And as you briefly touched on, I also mentioned, knowing he's maybe going to be the guy going into Saturday, how much can they get him ready now, preparing him as the starting center for the entirety of the week?
Yeah, I think it's a chain of communication is paramount for any offensive line, and it starts with the center. So just understanding where we're going, how we're going to get there, who's got whom on a given play, run or pass. It starts with the center. So that is one of the first things that they have to do. Obviously, clean snaps is a given. You've got to have them. I've seen so many plays ruined because of high snaps, wide snaps, bad snaps, missed time snaps. Not from Georgia primarily, but from across the league in college, professional. The timing of plays requires a good clean snap. So you start there and you think we're not going to spend a lot of time there. You want to take it for granted, but you only appreciate it when it doesn't happen. And so when you've got a big physical SEC top caliber defensive lineman like we're going to face against Alabama, it's one of those things where you can potentially start to see it affect other aspects of the game, and clean snaps is a part of it. Now, the beauty of playing center is most of the time you've got 6 to 8 snaps that you're one-on-one, that you've got to kind of earn your money, and the rest of the time you're working combos. And I'm not trying to undervalue those plays, but you don't have the ask that some other players see on a every play basis. But for those 6 to 8 plays, you've got to be able to step up and perform. And that's going to be a challenge for whether it's Tolliver or moving Glover in, or Cortez if he comes in, whoever it is who gets that call, gets that nod. It's going to be important. I mean, obviously, we're in postseason play now, so every play matters, and you can only afford so many hiccups, and they can't be big ones. So you're hoping that this group, as much as they've developed throughout this year, and they've gotten so much better, that they can try to rely on one another once again and create synergy across that front, despite having lost their anchor in the middle.
John, I think it's really well said. Very interesting stuff. Obviously, one of the biggest issues facing Georgia ahead of Saturday. What an interesting time this is for Georgia. 11-1, an 8th straight win against the in-state rival, and now looking ahead to the chance at a back-to-back SEC championship and the opportunity to topple a longtime nemesis. These are very interesting days, John. We appreciate your thoughts on all of it, and we'll look forward to talking to you very soon as the Dogs inch closer to what we believe is going to be an appearance in the college football playoff. Thank you so much for your time, and hope you're enjoying this holiday season.
I appreciate it, BA. It's always great to be a Dog. 8-time representative in the SEC championship out of the 10 seasons that Coach Smart has been there. What an incredible accomplishment, and another opportunity to get that giant silverback off our backs of beating Alabama. I'm looking forward to it. Should be an exciting game on Saturday.
Me too, John. Great stuff. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
To go back to the Daniel Harris thing just for a moment, the other guy they really like, I think, is Dominic Kelly. Now, you talk about young. Kelly's a reclassified freshman, so he's young, but they like him a lot, I think. So I think that Georgia feels like it can be in pretty good shape at the cornerback position. Obviously, you don't love Daniel Harris leaving like this. I'm not even necessarily mad at him. I just think he probably got bad advice. And I don't think anything about this decision is going to help him with his next chapter. But you know what? At a certain point, you just move on. And as Kirby said, you worry about the ones who are here. We're going to get ready for a very busy edition of our SEC Through in just a moment. We're looking forward to that. Let me also remind you about one thing, though. If you like college basketball, listen, I grew up loving college basketball. On this show, we pretty much only talk college football. But as a kid, I loved college basketball, and I love big-time college basketball events. We've got one coming to State Farm Arena in Atlanta here on December 20th. I want you to know about this. How about a chance to see Kentucky against St. John's and North Carolina against Ohio State? Starting at 12:30 that day. It's December 20th. the Johnnies host, against Kentucky, and then North Carolina against Ohio State. Big uniform games here, traditional powers. And how about Rick Pitino coaching against his old team as St. John takes on Kentucky, North Carolina against Ohio State? That's really fun. You can get tickets for this big event by going to Ticketmaster.com. If you love college basketball and you want to see some big brands colliding, pretty good value to see two games in the same building on the same day. I'm guessing it's going to be a pretty good vibe in State Farm. I love the big college basketball games when they take place in an arena. So many of these, when you get to tournament time, take place in the big domes. This is a chance to watch much more up close and personal. So fun stuff. State Farm Arena, December 20th. North Carolina against Ohio State, and how about Kentucky against St. John's? That's a pretty big one there. Ticketmaster.com to get your tickets for that. Now, let's do our SEC through, and obviously as a part of our SEC through, we have got to talk about all the coaching stuff from this weekend, and of course beginning with Lane Kiffin, who now is officially the head coach at LSU. So this was one of the most dramatic things we've ever seen, and I think it's worth pointing out as you lead into all of this that almost none of this was caused by LSU. And I don't want to belabor this point, but it is worth revisiting what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that some people thought nobody's going to want this LSU job because the governor of the state dared have an opinion about how the flagship university in the state was handling its business. He called out their ineptitude, said it's going to start getting better, and guess what? It did. LSU targeted Lane Kiffin. They put the package and the resources together to get Kiffin, and they got their man. So on the list of all of the things that have been crazy about this Kiffin move to LSU, almost none of it have been caused by LSU. And I'm guessing that how it goes down for Kiffin in Oxford is not really LSU's concern. They targeted Kiffin. They got their man. As far as they're concerned, this has all worked out the way they wanted it to. And the people and the Xeroxed copy of media takes of, who is this, governor to get involved in this? Look, everything about the LSU coaching search got better once he got involved. I don't even necessarily know anything about the governor. I don't really care about him, but that was always an overstated opinion about that. LSU pretty clearly not too much of a mess to get the coach they really wanted. But boy, speaking of a mess, I don't think there's any way to look at the way in which Kiffin exits Oxford as anything other than one of the worst soap opera stories we've seen play out, and there were 1,000 ways this maybe could be different. And I'll tell you, I think ultimately a lot of this just points back to basic human nature that drives all of us, even when we have more than we could have ever imagined. In Lane Kiffin's case, there's no way that he was a young guy or even a young up-and-coming coach, he could have ever imagined that one day he'd be paid as much money as LSU is about to pay him. Or maybe even more important than that, can you imagine having the power that Kiffin has possessed over the course of the last few weeks? The entire college football world has been on hold for Kiffin to make this decision. The average human will never have as much power as Kiffin has had as he's gone through his own personal deliberations. But when it's all said and done, all the money in the world and unimaginable power, that was not enough. Kiffin wanted to be liked. He wanted to be more than just a good coach, because getting a chance to get the LSU coaching job means you're a good coach. Kiffin didn't just want to be told he was a good coach. He wanted to be told he was a good guy. And his way of being a good guy was sticking around at Ole Miss, having his cake and eating it too, coaching Ole Miss in the playoff, getting pats in the back from the people in Oxford for, staying around and quote unquote finishing what he started. But if you're leaving for your rival, they're not going to want you to do that. They're just not. And the very weird campaign that was almost obviously orchestrated by his agent, Jimmy Sexton, starting with a lot of the CAA clients on the ESPN College Game Day on Saturday, frankly, it was a really unseemly thing. It just felt to me like conduct unbecoming, especially how forceful Kirk Herbstreit was on all of this, trying to push the narrative that Kiffin needs to stay and he needs to finish. When you see folks on the set for ESPN pushing that hard of a narrative, and when you're left to wonder, what is the ulterior motive that's creating this motivation to push this narrative, it does make you wonder, how often is something like that going on at ESPN? If it's this transparent right now with Saban and Herb Street, if it's this transparent, how many other times are they doing some version of this because the back channel, good old boy network of all these guys being friends with each other are being represented by the same agent? How much is this really going on? Certainly seems like a fair question. Some of you also saw this. That, you know what a bot farm is? It's all these, copy and pasted Twitter responses. Boy, there was a lot of this on the internet too, where it seemed like somebody somewhere must have paid something for them. Leaves you to wonder, was this also about the information campaign, the public relations campaign to save face for Lane Kiffin on his way out the door? And once again, all of this only serves to probably backfire on Lane. And instead of getting the treatment of, oh, Lane, you're a good boy, we like you, Lane, you're a good guy, we like you. Instead, it probably ends up shining a light on all the reasons why Lane Kiffin wasn't already a coach at a place like LSU, the sort of place where you can win a national championship. And boy, you better believe there are stories coming out of Oxford. We have no idea what is true and what isn't. And frankly, we won't bring any of them onto the show. We just simply won't, because it's all, as far as I'm concerned, rumor and innuendo. But boy, in the midst of watching how Lane Kiffin leaves Oxford, I do think you are reminded of why it was that Kiffin, who's clearly a good coach, you don't go 11-1 at Ole Miss if you're not a very good coach. Kiffin is a very good coach, but up until now, he was, I think, seen as fairly unhireable by programs of the stature of LSU or another school that pursued him this cycle, Florida. Kiffin was seen as somewhat unhireable. It's maybe why he didn't get the Auburn job a couple of years ago. Supposedly he's grown up and supposedly he's matured. Well, I think some of the actions here this week with all of this and how it's gone down would lead some to wonder, well, how real is that maturity and how recently has this supposed maturity been found? Kiffin has not behaved in a very dignified manner in all this. It's not LSU's fault. They targeted a coach. They got him. But boy, for Kiffin, I think it's a pretty unpleasant portrayal in his desperate attempt to be liked. I think it's only served to remind you why a lot of people didn't like Kiffin to begin with. However, the guy that became a bit of a star in all of this was ESPN's Marty Smith, camped out in Oxford the entire time. Apparently, as Kiffin tried to fly out of Oxford, taking whoever with him wanted to go from the Ole Miss program to Baton Rouge, Marty Smith, the ESPN reporter, apparently had to almost jump some barricades, get around some blockades to finally get to where Lane Kiffin was and get the interview with Lane that he had coveted. In the midst of that discussion, he talked to ESPN's Marty Smith about ultimately why it was he wanted to leave Ole Miss for LSU.
Why was LSU the right choice for you? Yeah, just there was something in me. This was really hard. My heart was here, but I just, I talked to some mentors, Coach Carroll, Coach Saban, especially when Coach Carroll said, "Man, your dad would tell you to go, man. Take the shot. Take the shot. You've accomplished a lot here." I always hated how we only gave 1 year to Tennessee and left. I really hated that feeling of that, even though it was an exciting year. But, I think that we gave a lot to this program and to the city, and some of the most historic wins in this stadium we've ever had, and best regular season in the history of the school. So I feel proud of that part, but it just became time. I talked to God and he told me it's time to take a new step. It's a new chapter.
So even in the midst of talking about why LSU, he's still trying to sell the job they did at Ole Miss, and we all agree he did a good job there. But if you no longer want to be there, they're no longer going to want you there. It is as simple as that, and you might as well stop trying. You are not going to get the pat on the back that you seek if you decide that you want to go coach for one of Ole Miss's most bitter rivals. Deep down, you probably ought to already know that. The other thing is, and I think it's an interesting phrasing, he talks about take the shot at a place like LSU. Ultimately, this is just what this comes down to. And as I've said repeatedly, college football is fundamentally unequal. There are coaches who are just smarter than others. You can say what you want about a lot of stuff involving Lane Kiffin, and believe me, over the course of the next few weeks, people will. But Lane Kiffin clearly knows football. Lane Kiffin knows how to teach football. Kiffin is in the top 10% or so of coaches in this sport. That means he's going to have options available to him that other coaches don't have. And working a place like LSU is one of those options. And LSU is just a more resourced program than Ole Miss is. Even in the day and age of NIL, that still remains true. So for Kiffin, you are naturally curious. If I was at a place that gave me every opportunity to win, can I win at the highest level? Can I be what my good friend Kirby Smart has been? Can I approach what my mentor Nick Saban has been? That curiosity is going to exist within you, and you're going to want to, as he says, take the shot. I think from that standpoint, he probably made a good decision, even if ultimately in trying to have it both ways at Ole Miss, he's ended up making this a pretty undignified process. Now, let me give you a couple of other things related to some of the other coaching searches that are out there. So Florida found out it wasn't getting Kiffin. They pivot. They go get John Summerall from Tulane. Summerall may turn out to be the next Nick Saban for all I know, but at Florida right now, this feels like a pretty hard sell. After failing with a Group of 5 coach from the state of Louisiana, your replacement for him ends up being another Group of 5 coach from the state of Louisiana. I mean, for a long time, and almost from the word go, Billy Napier got tagged as Sunbelt Billy, bringing the Sunbelt to the SEC. Never really shook that as a moniker. Well, now you're going to turn to AAC Johnny. Is that what this is now when it comes to John Summerall? And like I said, there are a lot of people that think Summerall's a very good coach. He was clearly going to coach somewhere in the SEC in 26. That just seemed to be a given. But for Florida, this is pretty clearly below the standard they saw for their next head coach. They wanted something of a more substantial pedigree after having failed with a flyer on a Group of 5 coach, but now they're stuck doing the same thing again. I think this one's probably a pretty tough sell for Florida, but no doubt they'll be out there trying to sell it pretty hard. Then Alex Golesh ends up taking the Auburn job after Golesh. The rumor mill would have you believe that Golesh might have been in line to get the Arkansas job. There was a fan revolt against that, and so this is what the rumor mill would have you believe, and so therefore Golesh ends up at Auburn. Once again, Golesh is one of these guys that seems like a coaching name on the ascent, was going to probably coach somewhere. I don't know if you're an Auburn fan why you necessarily, maybe your confidence just shaking and everything. I don't necessarily know why you feel like, boom, this is it. Auburn football is back. It just seems like there weren't a lot of big-name coaches to go around, and that's the problem, is that part of the reason why there was so much attention on Kiffin is because there weren't a lot of other established coaches that want to do this in the SEC right now. We're led to believe, for instance, Lincoln Riley had no interest. Dan Lanning seems very entrenched at Oregon right now. James Franklin was always, for the most part, interested in the Virginia Tech job. And frankly, Auburn probably should aspire more than to a fired coach anyway. So these other coaches of national stature, they just didn't want this at the moment. And so therefore, the best that you can probably do is a guy like Golesh. And, maybe it works out. But boy, it doesn't seem like a very exciting offseason at either Florida or Auburn if you're selling me on Group of 5 coach that – not exactly lighting the world on fire. Golesh has been fine, for instance, in South Florida, but it's not like he's winning a million games. He's won some. He's played Alabama close a couple times, but your previous coach had beaten Alabama, so I don't know about that. However, both these hires seem better than what Arkansas has done. And Georgia fans are interested in Ryan Silverfield getting the Arkansas job because they're about to play Arkansas, and Silverfield's the one that made fun of Georgia in player arrests as the Memphis coach earlier this fall, which will be of interest for some Georgia fans. But the other thing that's of note here for me on this is Silverfield did not have a good year at Memphis. They lost 4 times in AAC play. Now, they did beat Arkansas, so maybe that was enough, but they lost 4 times in conference play. And I got to tell you, if I'm an Arkansas fan, and I do try to put myself every now and then in the position of some of these other fan bases, if I'm an Arkansas fan and I've got my athletic director who's gallivanting around as the chairman of the playoff selection committee, but this is the kind of hire he's making for my program, I have to wonder, what are you doing with your time? And are you using your time appropriately? This just feels like, to me, a very small hire for Arkansas. And I know for a lot of people out there in the northwest corner of the natural state, they'll tell you that a lot of their NIL resources are just getting siphoned off to basketball, that John Calipari's done a pretty good job of convincing their boosters to support the basketball team, and maybe there isn't enough money left over for football. I'm just guessing. You get the impression that might be true. But this Silverfield hire for Arkansas just feels really, really small. And if I'm an Arkansas fan, I'm probably pretty mad at Hunter Yurchek today, because I don't know that he's necessarily making himself into a hero as the selection committee chairman right now, but whatever time that he is spending on that is time he could have spent looking for a better coach for my program than a guy that really not even winning at his current job, Memphis. And now he's going to come to Arkansas. We're supposed to expect that to get better. This just feels, I'll say the same thing again, it feels like a very small hire for Arkansas to make. Oh, yeah, by the way, if that's not enough, late last night, we find out that now the Kentucky job is also opening up too, or at least it's expected to open up. I don't know if that's finally it or not, but that's expected now to open up too. So there is nothing more Kentucky than this, is jumping into the coaching search after 4 SEC teams have already made coaching hires. Good luck finding any candidate there on that. But it looks like Kentucky's coming open. And listen, this is one of those deals where Stoops, Mitch Barnhart, the athletic director of the entire program, the vibe up there in Lexington, the people up there will tell you, it's been weird for a while. There was tension between Calipari and Stoops, tension between Barnhart and Stoops, tension between the fans and Stoops. They are spending a lot of money on a program that just seems to be bumping into a fairly low ceiling. I don't know what you do about it. Stoops will tell you that he's winning, or has won at Kentucky, more than previous Kentucky coaches has. He's right about that. Fans will say, well, based on what we're spending, we expect to be winning more than this. I think they have a right to feel that way. It just goes to show you that if you stick around a place long enough, eventually people will get tired of you. And it seems like that's happened for Stoops. He tried to leave and couldn't. Kentucky fans wanted him gone. Now they get their wish. But hiring a coach to win as much as Stoops has won at Kentucky, as meager as those results have been, not necessarily an easy thing. Now, let me shift to some of the actual results on the field for a moment. I'll give you a couple of thoughts pretty quick. I thought the Iron Bowl on Saturday night was really fun. I thought it was fun having that on Saturday night. I thought that was a really cool deal. It's amazing to me that Auburn won a game all season long, because you're watching this and listen, intuitively, you have a tendency, I think, to root for the underdog in some of these games just because you want the game to be close. Can you imagine what it must be like rooting for Auburn? It felt like to me in the second half they fumbled every other play. They found some new way to louse things up over and over again. And I don't know what you do with Alabama right now, because I'm just like the rest of you. I'm on guard for them to play like the 85 Bears against Georgia this Saturday, because it seems time, especially in the first quarter, that's what Alabama typically does. But so help me, this is not a great offense right now. Now, and who knows what's going on with Ryan Williams, not even really playing on Saturday. But Alabama has not been explosive offensively for a while now. Feels like this ought to be an opportunity for Georgia to put a defensive game plan for 4 quarters together against the Crimson Tide team in a way they just haven't. And look, as I said before, we're all on guard for it, that somehow Alabama's magically healthier than it's been, more locked in than it's been. I'm on guard for anything on Saturday. But boy, you watch them again against Auburn, and Auburn's a pretty good defense. This is an Alabama offense that just for a while now has not been firing on all cylinders. This just feels like a real opportunity for Georgia if it can take advantage of it. I was impressed by Vanderbilt, man. I was. They went into Knoxville and they handled business against Tennessee, won convincingly. Diego Pavia's brother got arrested. That's a crazy thing, too, for whatever it was that was going on there. But Vanderbilt's a real deal team. 10-2, only 2 losses. Close at Texas, close at Alabama. I know they dropped in the AP poll, which doesn't really make any sense. But to me, Vanderbilt, their playoff candidacy is very real. I don't know if they're going to get there because there's a lot of teams at 10-2. And Georgia's hoping to stick a 9-3 team down in the mix of that, or a 10-3 team in the mix of that on Saturday after they beat Bama. But Vanderbilt feels like a very real playoff contender to me right now. Clark Lee, who does sign his contract extension, he deserves a lot of credit. He really does. You have to admit, this is a Vanderbilt team that is more substantial than we ever thought any Vanderbilt team could probably be. And I thought what they did in Knoxville on Saturday to a Tennessee team that had played pretty hard the previous week, I thought that was a pretty big statement. I'll finish with this. Ohio State, Michigan. There's a lot I could say, but I'll simply say this, is that so Ohio State's the reigning national champion. They have run through this season against mostly soft competition. And the one blemish that has existed for them in recent years, the game against Michigan on the road, they won fairly convincingly on Saturday. I don't know that any team in 2025 is unbeatable. I really don't. But Ohio State is, for me right now, a deserving number one. They are. And so if you are wondering what does Georgia have at stake in the SEC championship, I do believe this is something. I do believe that for Georgia, if you had any team you'd want to postpone playing for as long as you could, I think it's Ohio State. I don't really know that it's any other team other than Ohio State, but I do believe it is Ohio State. If you could postpone a game against Ohio State, you would probably want to, at least just for lack of a better choice. And so by beating Alabama on Saturday, not only does Georgia get a top 4 seed out of that, it also has a very good chance of being either the 2nd or the 3rd seed, depending on how the other stuff plays out. But in all likelihood, Georgia would elevate itself above the number 4 seed, which means Alabama, as I'm going to presume the 1 seed, because I'm going to presume they beat Indiana in the Big Ten championship. That's my presumption anyway. That would mean you wouldn't have to play Alabama until the wouldn't have to play Ohio State until the national championship. And I don't think you should be scared of the Buckeyes, but I do think you should respect them. And I do think if you could postpone that until a national championship, assuming yourself capable of going on a run, I think you'd probably want to do that. I mean, listen, I'm going to give credit where credit's due. For an Ohio State team that had a lot of questions asked about it, can you get over the hump? Can you beat Michigan? Can you have the toughness required to win a game like that? On Saturday, Ohio State did. You got to at least acknowledge that. Pretty big statement made by the Buckeyes, reigning national champs, still undefeated as we move into the postseason. Ohio State deserves at least a little bit of credit for that. It will make that your SEC through. And we'll give you a golden shoe today. This one's pretty cool. Obviously, everybody pulling in all the stops in light of the SEC championship. Let me show you this on the screen here for a moment. Jay Buchanan writes in to say, I've got a nomination for the golden shoe. I had my dad play Glory, Glory on a UGA-inspired single-track guitar from Slow Train Guitars in honor of being back in the SEC championship. Let's listen to Jay's dad a little bit on this. How good does that sound? Does that not sound good? I mean, that just sounds like the South right there. They can't do that up in Big Ten country, I promise you that. Jay Buchanan's dad just nailing Glory, Glory in celebration of the SEC championship appearance for the Dogs. Well-earned golden shoe. That has a sharp sound right there. Clearly got some skills on that guitar. I love to see that. We'll give him a golden shoe. We'll also remind brand new Florida coach Jon Sumrall that he is stepping into a mess down there in Gainesville. How about 1,850 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. Now, Sumrall can say, that's my predecessors. That's all on them. But guess what, Johnny? That's what you're inheriting. That's what you're stepping into. And Georgia's going to be ready for you down there. I guess not in Jacksonville this upcoming year. But you know what? Ready for you nonetheless. That's our Gator Hater Updater. All right, we'll see you back here tomorrow. More talk, getting ready for the SEC Championship. More talk about a big postseason run for these Dogs, at least we hope. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to speaking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised for the prices promised. You can trust them on all of that. So as I said during the regular show, I feel like my voice is sounding, I mean, this is the best it's sounded in a while. I was not expecting it to be that way. today, but I don't know. It feels a little bit better to me right now. So maybe you feel the same way. I don't know. But we'll jump in here and get your comments about Georgia-Bama. You want to look back on Georgia Tech, Georgia-Tech, or the Kiffin stuff or anything else. We'll hit it all with you here right now. Johnny Surfdog also mentioned what we talked about earlier, that Florida settles for another group of 5 coach out of Louisiana. And they have to know this is what people are going to say. They have to know this. It doesn't mean that Summerall won't be a good coach, by the way, but they have to know that he steps in with 2 strikes on him in the batter's box because it's a very similar profile of the previous guy they had hired. Crow King 123 says Ohio State's riding that natty high. He says they know how to win. Saw it with UGA back in 22. Yeah, I mean, look, we're not liars around here, and everybody knows this. Of course, a game against Ohio State would be a tough matchup. Even for Georgia in 2022, it was still a tough matchup. That there are formidable challengers that exist out there for Georgia. Even outside the SEC, this can be true. And, of course, on a yearly basis, you would assume that Ohio State would clearly be one of those. That's obviously true. Foster Moss says if Georgia wins on Saturday and we win the national title, he says Saturday will be remembered the most. Maybe so. I get the point you're making, Foster. It would clearly, I think, be a big step towards that because here's what I really believe. And we're going to talk more about this probably tomorrow. There is no perfect path for Georgia. That you can't prepare a path for Georgia and say, here's exactly how much rest you want. Here's when you want to play again. Here's who you want to play. You really can't do that right now. All you can do is hope that Georgia is prepared for the path. So I felt this way on Friday. I probably got, and I said this on our DawgNation postgame show, I probably got a little greedy. I wanted Georgia to look like a national champion against Georgia Tech. And I really felt like if Georgia can just look the part, then maybe they'll be ready to go on a run. And it doesn't matter who they play, it doesn't matter when they play, it doesn't matter where they play. They'll just be ready. But Georgia didn't do that against Tech. If we're being honest, the part that I wanted Georgia to look, they didn't. They didn't. Saturday's another chance to do that because when you look back on last year, I really don't believe people will say, oh, Ohio State didn't have to play in the Big Ten title game, and so therefore they got hot. Y'all, Ohio State was the most talked about team in the offseason last year. Ohio State simply emerged by the end of the season as the team that most people thought they would be before the year began. They simply, over the course of a long season, eventually emerged as people thought they would be. I don't think Ohio State leveraged a particular path. They just finally became the team they were supposed to be. I feel very similarly about Georgia right now, that what I need is whether Georgia plays in Mercedes-Benz Stadium or Sanford Stadium or somebody else's stadium or whatever else. If Georgia will just look the part of a champion, then the path may very well take care of itself. But there's also a really good chance that Georgia just may not win the national championship. Could happen. We've spent most of the year assuming that Georgia probably would not win the national championship. Now we're slightly more optimistic. But it's all, to me, dependent on how Georgia plays more so than who and where Georgia plays, and when, for that matter. DMart42 says, we've seen that game from Kirby 100 times now. He says, Tech wasn't scoring, so parked the bus, frustrating but not surprising. I don't know that's completely true. I do think it was somewhat true. I think that Georgia went into the game knowing that it could run the ball at will against Tech and really believing that maybe it had a better defensive game plan, and so therefore they didn't want to do anything to mess it up. But at the same time, Georgia wanted to do more offensively than it did on Friday. It wanted to throw it more and throw it better. Kirby acknowledged that in the clip we played. So to a certain extent, yeah, Georgia wasn't going to mess up a game plan that they didn't feel like Tech could score a touchdown against. That's to a certain extent true, but at the same time, they did want to score more than they did. They did want to do more of that. And they were, I believe, to a certain extent frustrated they did. Spencer Clark says, just run the ball. Alabama can't stop it. Well, they're clearly going to try to run it some. more than some. And we believe that Chauncey Bowens is coming back. That'll be a good thing. Bowens just turned out to be a good player, and boy, Bowens really had some success against Alabama the last time around. Dennis Wilson's in here feeling good. I'm glad you're enjoying it, Dennis. I'm glad you're enjoying it. This is a little later in the year for Miami fans to still be feeling pretty good about themselves. You got to keep in mind, Dennis, those of us who are Georgia fans are pacing ourselves right now because we're used to seasons that go deep into January. So we're pacing ourselves. We're not, this is not New Year's Eve for us. It's not amateur night. We're not going to come in here and, get plastered in the first hour. We're pacing ourselves here right now. Trevor Maffetone says, any update on Drew Bobo? I mean, based on the way that everybody's talking about this, and we spent a lot of time on the show on this today, there's a very good chance that Bobo is not going to play for quite some time, maybe even the rest of the season. You at least have to consider that a possibility. So next man up, obviously, was Malachi Tolliver on Friday. Quite likely that he's the guy again on Saturday. I do believe that Cortez Smith may at least be a consideration for Georgia on that. Cortez is a true freshman, and Georgia's already got a couple of true freshmen that's playing a lot. But there are some people that I know pretty well that know Cortez pretty well, and they'll tell you they think he is a future star. Not to say that Malachi Tolliver's not. I'm not playing favorites on this. I'm really not. But there are a lot of people who like Cortez a lot. So they'll at least, if he's healthy, and we're led to believe that he might be, they'll at least give Cortez some consideration. But you can't have a competition. This is one of those things where, people have this thought of, hey, there's a competition every week, and whoever competes the best wins. And that's the guy that's going to play. You don't have time to do that. You got to pick a guy, and you got to get him ready to play. So they'll make their decision. I'm guessing it's probably Tolliver, although I do believe Cortez might be an option. I'm guessing it's probably Tolliver, and they'll just spend a week getting him ready. And there's a very good chance that after a week's worth of all the attention he's about to get, keep in mind, Georgia made a couple of hires in the offensive line during the offseason. They got extra hands to do all kinds of stuff. And Drew Bobo himself, I'm sure, Drew Bobo is essentially a coach in his own right. I'm sure he'll be, offering a lot of help too. D-Mart says that Tolliver snaps it high. Yeah, it seems like I was mostly joking about it in the Charlotte game that you could tell that Drew wasn't in there because the snap was coming in high. It was a little bit less of a joke when it was coming in high against Tech on Friday. But as John said, the biggest issue is pre-snap, pointing, Mike's here, pointing all the stuff, all of that communication. That's what we're led to believe that Georgia struggled with that last year. In fact, not to pat myself on the back, but we've done major topics on the center position, even going back to fall camp. When Tolliver got banged up during fall camp, we did a whole segment this summer on, for us, 5-6 minutes is kind of a long time. We did a whole segment this summer on Georgia's lack of experience depth at the center position, backup-wise. Did a whole segment on that because, as we said, if Drew Bobo gets hurt, this is going to become a very big issue. Y'all, we weren't just whistling Dixie when we did that because now this is a thing. Drew Bobo is hurt, and now the inexperience at center is a major concern. So that's a pretty big deal. And I do believe for the communication stuff that Georgia sometimes struggled with last season, there's a big part of that that's on Tolliver right now too. Gunner derives a lot of his confidence from the play of his offensive line. And so you got to have, whether it's Tolliver or Cortez, and it's going to be probably one of the two, probably Tolliver, you got to help instill that confidence in your quarterback. And then after the ball is snapped, you got to block Tim Keenum, which is a good time.
So there's a controversy that you may want to be aware of that we've been keeping our eye on.
Okay.
All of the Lane Kiffin skeletons are going to come out of the closet. And the DawgNation I team is not independently verified this yet, but Brandon Walker and Bunky Perkins have been discussing today that Juice Kiffin is apparently not actually Lane's dog. And apparently he is a rental that lives with somebody else.
Is that right? That's pretty interesting. I also saw where both Juice and Lane lost their blue checks. I guess Ole Miss stopped paying the fee to Elon for that. I have to admit, Jay, when you jumped in, I have implicit trust in you, of course. But when you jumped in with online rumors about Lane Kiffin, I was like, oh gosh, what's he about to say? Because there are a few of those out there right now. But we're not going to touch any of those. The Juice Kiffin thing, that was fair for the airwaves. Which, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm suspicious about all the dog stuff. All the dog stuff. I don't understand why Kirk Herbstreit's dogs run all the time. I don't get that. The fact that Lane Kiffin would have a pretend dog that he only brings around to endear people to himself, honestly, this feels very in keeping with a lot of what's gone on with Lane Kiffin. Kiffin, it seems like, wants to hear more than you are a good coach. Kiffin's clearly a good coach. He went 11-1. Good coach. Kiffin wants to hear that he's a good guy. Kiffin wants to be liked. And it seems like he will try pretty hard to get any of that. So that's very interesting if the dog is not really Kiffin's. That's the one online internet-style rumor that we'll entertain about Lane Kiffin. The rest of it, we'll leave you to yourself to do some searching on. Somebody mentioned challenging Mike. I'm sorry for not seeing this. Challenging Mike Bobo instead of challenging Gunner Stockton. Look, here's the deal on that. I realize it was not a good day for Georgia offensively on Friday. But, y'all, we got to have some context here. Georgia is, and I'm sorry to say this, and we're pretty good about giving a lot of space for people to say whatever they want. We don't have blasphemy laws around here. If you want to criticize a coach, you are free to do so. Free to do so. But proper context, Georgia is 11-1. Going to the SEC championship after having I would say, a very good year offensively. And as far as what happened to Georgia offensively on Friday, once again, you can side, but it certainly sounds like that the Georgia coaches felt like there was some stuff on Friday that Gunner could have taken better advantage of, and he didn't do it. That's what they're going to tell you. Now, you can decide for yourself if you think that's true, but that's what they're going to tell you. Gunner's been doing it all year long. I assume he'll play better, but that's what they're going to say about that. And then, you lost your starting center during the game. That's not an insignificant loss. Jim also mentioning the non-safety at the beginning of the game when Tech was backed up in their own end zone. I never really saw a good replay of that. It certainly seemed like that the pass from King at the time did not get back to the line of scrimmage. And I didn't necessarily see a receiver in the area. Thankfully, it ended up not being that big of an issue. Brandon Griffin says the committee may drop Bama to 11 tomorrow based on their lackluster performance versus unranked Auburn. That would make the SEC championship game a must-win for Bama. If they lose, then the door opens for Vandy or Miami. You've got a lot of teams in that 10-2 category, and depending on how it plays out, there's not enough room for all of them. And if I had to guess, I really don't think the committee knows what it wants to do with Notre Dame and Miami. I really don't. Because they clearly have wanted Notre Dame in the field, but Miami did get its 10th win. They've mostly been winning with fairly high margin lately, and they beat Notre Dame head-to-head. But now you run the risk of putting two ACC – I mean, the simplest thing, as others have said, is just to break your own rules and not give the ACC an automatic qualifier because it's Virginia Duke in the ACC championship game. You could just solve all this by making Miami the ACC's representative, and that makes it a lot simpler. But this is one of those years. It's different than a year ago. Teams like Miami, Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, Alabama, the 10-2 teams that you're sifting through right now have better resumes than, like, say, Indiana, SMU had a year ago. Vanderbilt their regular season finale was a road win against a ranked Tennessee. That's a pretty big way to punctuate a 10-2 season. Miami winning easily, also having beaten Notre Dame. Notre Dame has been throttling teams as of late too. Don't really have the big win necessarily, other than I guess USC, but mostly throttling teams as of late. Honestly, as much as I hate Texas, I think the Texas case at 9-3 is probably better than some people want to give it credit for. I do think that. I like Texas, and y'all know I'm pro SEC, but I don't really extend a lot of pro SEC grace to Texas because I don't really feel that they are truly full-fledged SEC in my mind. So if I'm saying this, it's coming from an honest place. I think if Texas had played McNeese State instead of Ohio State, then there's a very good chance we're talking about Texas as a playoff team right now because they have beaten some ranked opponents. It's weird. They were given what they thought was a soft schedule, and some of these teams have turned out to be a little bit better. In the case of Vandy, Texas beat them, as a for instance. Beat Oklahoma. Who was the other ranked team it beat? There's a third one. Why am I blanking? But they've beaten some ranked opponents. If it's not for the Ohio State non-conference game at 10-2, Texas is probably in. And I know people say, well, they're really being excluded because they lost to Florida. That's a reasonable argument, but it's not true. It's not. I genuinely believe if they were 10-2, even having lost to Florida, they're still probably getting in. So you can say, well, the exclusion's not based on losing to Ohio State, it's based on losing to Florida. You can say that, and it sounds like a very strong point in an argument, but I don't believe that to be true. I really don't. This committee counts losses. And the third came because of the game against Ohio State. UJ Marine on the subject of, as he calls it, battered Aggie syndrome. Yeah, I mean, honestly, look, I know that they are just sick to themselves having lost to Texas again. And Texas really had some fun with this one on Friday night. Really stirred it up after, getting that win. And I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, look, I went into the weekend just assuming that Georgia's going to play in the SEC championship. I thought there was an overwhelming likelihood that one of either A&M or Alabama might lose. So I think both might lose. And for a while, it seemed like they both might. So it's hard to go undefeated. It is hard to go undefeated. But I know there is no game that Texas A&M would have rather lost less than that one. Let's see what else. Let me get a few more comments. I'll also get some Facebook comments here too. Matt Rukavina checking in. Glad to see him. She says, I'm awfully tempted to post the video of Gabby, that's his wife, celebrating their win over Texas A&M. Definitely gave us drunk, obnoxious Georgia fans a run for our money. Listen, as long as Texas not playing Georgia, I'm plenty happy for her on that. So good for her. Good for her. That's awesome. Let's see what else. Mike Massell says Bobo needs to come up with the very best game plan of the year for Saturday's game. I don't dispute that. I mean, I'd love to see Georgia firing. I mean, the big issue for Georgia is they've just got to get out of the first quarter against Alabama defensively. I mean, remember, that's the thing that's hurt Georgia against Bama in the last two games. Both of the Kalen DeBoer coached games against the Crimson Tide is Georgia just did not have any answers for Alabama in the first quarter. And in both games, 24 in Tuscaloosa, this season in Athens, it got better as the game went along, but you really ruined any chance you had to win by what you allowed to them in the first quarter. That's what's got to change, I would say. And Josh Hobbs says, we've got to get pressure on Ty Simpson. He says he's a totally different quarterback when he gets sacked and pressured. I would agree on that. And that's where, guys like Gabe Harrison, Quintavious Johnson playing better, that probably helps you. I would say that, to my eyes, it seems like Georgia has tried to play Alabama over the years every kind of way you can play them. Soft zone, pressure, everything in between. I mean, it just seems like they've tried to do a lot. And so they'll hope for the game plan this time around that works. Josh Hobbs says also no BS turnovers in our own end this time. Obviously, the big fumble by Carson Beck in 2023. I'm not saying blame Beck for it, but that fumble was a huge one in 2023. Don Wynn says the defense has to be aggressive, not conservative. I think most Georgia fans will probably agree with that. Rambo says the fact is, going back to Ohio State, they beat the SEC's 5th, 6th, or 7th best team by just 7 points in Columbus, and they were outgaining yardage. That is true. But, I do think that pretty clearly Ohio State has been, pretty dominant since then. That was Julian Sagan's first start. And I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying. And we certainly had some fun with that at the expense of the Buckeyes. When Georgia handled Texas far easier than Ohio State did, we did have some fun with that. But, look, this is a team that's got 2 dynamite receivers. You can make a case they get the best offensive and defensive player in America with Jeremiah on one side and Caleb Downs on the other. I don't think that there's any team that Georgia can't beat, but I would say that Ohio State is probably the hardest team to beat, I think. Brandon Griffin wants to see our wide receivers sell the PI a little bit better. Never hurts, probably. The one, was it Noah Thomas that just got absolutely accosted? I don't understand that one. Tennille Calvino checking out. Tennille, thanks for being here, as always. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming says, where'd I get this T-shirt, or the sweatshirt, the pullover? I told you, this is one of those old school tailgate apparel things and this company has gone out of business. But don't you love this? I love the retro style. I like the hoodies that have the little drawstring. I like all of this. But they don't make it anymore, I don't think. But I do like it. I'm glad you like it too. Yeah, Matthew Deal says it was Noah Thomas. He was mugged twice. Yeah. I mean, he was just like, had him around the neck and everything. It's like, what are we doing? Andy asking about Jared Curtis on Friday. He said if he does join, where does that leave the Ryans? Well, you always got to be on guard for something. I mean, you can't keep every quarterback, right? So anything is possible on some of that. I do feel, I have talked to people who know more about this than I do, closer to the situation. They still feel pretty good for Georgia on this. I do. Anything could happen. Curtis could leave Georgia's class. It could happen. I think there are some people who feel like that some of this has been exaggerated. I really do. And the biggest tell of all may be the fact that publicly on social media, Jared's mom is still touting Georgia. That's a pretty big person for Georgia to still have in its corner. So there are people that I trust that think that Curtis is still going to come to Georgia. They'll also tell you they can't guarantee that it stays that way, but they do believe that right now. But yeah, that should be a big one on Friday. All right. Let's see what else. Matthew Dills on the availability report. So I'm guessing the first availability report will be Wednesday. I'm assuming it's not any different than a normal SEC game. I'm assuming it's Wednesday, but there is no, I don't think, magical recovery coming from Drew Bobo here. I don't believe that's the case. So, you can, obviously not officially ruled out, but I don't know anybody who thinks that there's a better chance that Bobo doesn't play again this year. In other words, unfortunately, that's the case. What else? Jacob Alexander on those Auburn receivers dropping all those passes. Yeah, how much money did they pay Eric Singleton? My gosh. I want to say they probably paid him $1 million. He's just dropping everything. Archie Hughes on the subject of Texas playing a little bit better as of late. Yeah, they have. They have been playing a little bit better as of late. when they're not playing Georgia. Steve Rogers says the 10-2 teams will come down to TV ratings. Well, if that's the case, keep in mind, highest rated team in America this year has been Alabama. Georgia, I think, is number 2. Alabama's been the highest rated team in America this year. So, UGA Marine on the subject of a Texas referee throwing a shoe. Pretty funny video. I'll look for that. Rick Wallace also mentioning that the Notre Dame thing being about money. Well, what's funny is, and we've talked about this before, is, Notre Dame does have following in major metropolitan areas, New York, Chicago, places like that. But as a big TV ratings winner, for those of you who care about that kind of stuff at all, and you're well within your right not to care whatsoever, you really are. You're probably better off if you don't. But Notre Dame is not a huge ratings winner anymore. It's amazing. College football's really changed. That nobody gets as big ratings as the SEC does. Not Notre Dame, not anybody in the Big Ten. Nobody does. Now, Ohio State and Michigan will probably end up being the highest rated game of the year, but the other games will all be SEC games. All be SEC games. And in most weeks, the SEC is doubling, if not tripling, the opposition. So, if it really is all about TV ratings, from a rating standpoint, the SEC gets the best ratings. Ultimately, I've always said that the conspiracy theory that I believe in is that college football, the powers that run this, would take less fans if they could get the fans distributed in the right places. More of the major metros. That's why, Miami is attractive. Notre Dame, with its following in big cities, that's attractive. I think that college football would like to distribute its fans away from the rural areas. I think that college football would love to do that, which is obviously betraying the heart and soul of college football. And we argue and fight against that in every way, shape, and form. But I do believe that's what's ongoing. All right, we got to go. By the way, it's good to see Steve Schaffini. Talk about one of our great commenters. Good to see Steve Schaffini in here today with a very funny comment. His assessment of the Notre Dame folks. UGA Marine says, would you rather have Coleman, Williams, or one of the Gator receivers, Brown or Wilson? I will tell you this. I do think is Dallas Wilson his name from Florida? I do think he's a really good receiver. Cam Coleman would be the guy that I wanted. And listen, it's not bulletin board material. He may have, obviously he's done big things against Georgia, but I've always felt that Cam Coleman's a better receiver than Ryan Williams is. I think you put Cam Coleman in an offense that works, that'd be really something. Now, that's also a very pricey thing for Georgia. I don't know, but yeah, could be interesting. Could be interesting. Brandon Griffin at DawgNation.com also likes Coleman too. One more here at YouTube, then we got to go. Oh, I like this from Lance D, who says Vandy reminds him of the 2012 Texas A&M with Johnny Manziel and surging at the end of the season, a 10-2 team. That's a pretty interesting comparison, I do. And personality-wise, maybe not be a bad fit either. Let's see what else. Foster Moss on the subject of the Michigan player headbutted the referee, did get penalized for it, but didn't get ejected from the game. Very lucky not to get thrown out because that seems pretty cut and dry. I would say pretty lucky on that, all things considered, Foster. That's a really good observation from Saturday for sure. Okay, so all week long we're just jam-packed with recruiting stuff and at Georgia-Bama stuff and the rest of the landscape here with coaching hirings and playoff stuff. College football is so much fun, and it is crazy. It's as busy and crazy right now as it's ever been. So we'll keep talking about all of it. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promise. You can trust them on all of that, including getting your heating system during this cold time of year tuned up, ready to go, get you nice and toasty and warm. They'll take care of you on that. So y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com today. And of course, back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.